for coming. It's a great treat to have Tony speak at the CAC again. You all know Tony Fuller from Communications. Tony's topic today is Seminal Films of the 50s. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks for having me. I'm just amazed at how the large crowds have turned out since I used words like seminal and abbreviated 1950s. But when we're thinking about films, what seminal films of the 1950s? Why look at seminal films? Why not look at popular films? Because that's, after all, how things are measured to begin with, at least in Hollywood, is how many people came? How much, what's my box office line? Well, why? Art, true art, and the best films are art, really do two things, and it's an age-old question. That question is, does art reflect society or does it create society? And that's why we're examining seminal films, where films have been around since 1900. You can argue in 1896, 1897, but the art of creating stories really began in about 1903. And when we think about 1950, but we didn't go back that far, because I think the 50s is a very underappreciated period of time when we think about as being placid. Many people think of the 1950s as being placid and calm, nothing's going on. Well, you might say under calm waters, things happen. Ideas run deep. And so that's why I chose the 50s, because it was really a time of rejuvenation, healing, and a time for the nation after World War II to kind of get back on track and find out who we were. We wanted to rest. We wanted to think about things differently. We were effectively creating another world, even though many people just label it as a placid, calm world. So that's why I chose 1950s. Plus, there were a lot of magnificent films in the 50s. So, now, one of the ideas is seminal films. It could have been the important films or most successful films, but I equate seminal to also the word best. The best films, seminal films, and each of you probably has your own list. I've got certainly a list that you may or may not agree with, and you may or may not agree with the list that I have here. I'm not going to show it to you. I'll give you a little banner here, see? Celluloid banner in harmony with the... And so, what I would hope, although many of my selections here you may agree with, but don't think that I just, trying to say this is the only list that's worth anything, because that's not true. Each of us is subjective. Certainly if you lined us all up, we might come up with a very impressive list of 12. And so hopefully this list has meaning for you, and we're going to go over. I've got 12 films that I've chosen. I could have gone deeper, but 12 films. And we're going to do a cursory look at 9 of those. And towards the front of the list, we're going to go into more detail about 3 of them. And we're principally going to be looking at, in those 3, we're going to look at technical aspects and techniques, creative techniques, and also sort of the sociological, psychological, spiritual, moral aspects that we may see in films. So let's unveil the list. Ooh, another visual. Okay. Here's the list, starting from first to last. I'm sure that many of you have seen most of these. How many of you seen all these? All right. What are some of the ones? Great. What are some of the ones that you've missed, those of you that haven't seen all of them, just out of curiosity? Perhaps Marty?
Which is an excellent film you never hear anything about.
It is a phenomenal film. Really, truly
No,
phenomenal.
not spectacular, but
It's not an epic.
to get into the psyche of one person, a regular Joe,
Absolutely.
starting Ernest Borgnine.
Well, let's go to Blackboard Jungle, which is number 12. And Glenn Ford, and he's got his hands full. And who is he? Guess what? And 4 Oscar nominations, which included cinematography, editing, and writing. And what about Blackboard Jungle? It's about a number of issues. But on the social venue, it's about the haves and have-nots, the educated and the uneducated. And it also covers racial issues. Sidney Poitier was in here and did a phenomenal job. And so much of the strife comes because you have a built-in system of the sociology of that school, and these are the misfits that he's assigned. He's a new teacher, he's assigned to it, and he is challenged by them. But he is a new teacher, and he has been at war, and not recently, but he sees things totally different. At first he's very unruffled, but he never quite gives up, and he stands his ground, and there is a wonderful sociological element in there because Sidney Poitier's character is by far the most intelligent person in the classroom, except for perhaps the professor and teacher. And they have it out, but it turns out that they have much more in common. So it's really addressing racial issues also. The haves and have-nots. We're talking about people that are middle income, meaning the teacher, versus, in this case, the students who were underprivileged. And also, we look at this from a psychological front because Danier, which is Glenn Ford's character's name in the film, really does a lot of self-reflection about how do I do this? Should I do this? Why should I be involved in this? Especially after you got stabbed in the hand by that student. Okay, so that's number 12. Marty, a really understated movie. And look at this. 4 Oscars, Best Pick, Director, Writing, Best Actor, and 8 Oscar nominations altogether, 4 of which won. And if you haven't seen this, it's. Let's go back for a second because I didn't quite define best film. What makes a best film? What allows a film to go forth? Not just popularity, it helps if it's popular, but some of the films on here are not big blockbusters initially, but they catch on. Well, first of all, my idea about any great film, it first and foremost must have a fantastic script. Because no matter what you do to it after that, technically or acting, whatever, you are limited to start with. So you must have a fantastic script. So best writing, there's your start. And what are some other elements that you expect out of a great film or the best films? Well, you expect technical expertise. Well, what all would that involve? Virtually any and all components. You've got lighting, editing. What else? What else might you put in there? Acting. And it has to be a very high level of directing. Now, one of the elements of the great films that I didn't mention yet is the nature of the work enduring. Does it last more than 10 years? Because if it's not enduring, it can't be great. It might serve up the local 5 or 10 year spectrum of what's popular now. Let's all go down there. Yeah. But the great pieces of work endure.
Tony, was music one of the nominations for Marty? You recall?
I don't know. I'll have to go, I can check later, but I don't recall right offhand. So, Anyway, so all the great films address these issues we're talking about: sociology, psychology, politics, spirituality, artistry, all the great films. Okay, so now Marty was really what I call a self-reflective study of social values affecting self-worth, because the lead, and this was his greatest role as far as I'm concerned, because it's against his casting. He plays a very modest but upbeat person who hasn't really succeeded, except he's done all the things that we aspire to. He has a regular job, he's nice to people, and he endures a lot of challenges in his life. And he's already given up at age 34 and never getting married, and his own home life is such that his relatives say, "Oh, when are you getting married? When are you?" And he's already given up because he's not handsome, he's not spectacular, he's not wealthy, he's just a nice, really good person. And he goes out one night, he accidentally meets a school teacher who sees herself as very plain, and she's given up too. And they had a really wonderful evening that night. Nothing unusual, just staying at the dance. I think he walked her home. And then that's what the story revolves around, is two people accepting really who they are and how they got together. It's a really great piece. And this has to do, again, social, are we creating reality or are we reflecting reality? And it's very interesting when you think about it. So I'm glad you like Marty. Anyone else like Marty? Oh, anyone else seen Marty?
I
you
haven't
must-
seen it. Oh, now we know.
Every one of these films are just really fantastic. Ooh, everyone's seen North by Northwest. And by the way, depending on how much time, I don't know if we're going to have sufficient time to go into detail, but actually, if you compress the decade of the 1950s and you look at it not compress it, but you look at it longitudinally, what you're going to see is that some of the social mores, some of the psychological approaches vary, because 1950, 51, 52 were much different from the mid-50s, which were again much different from the late 50s. And it's kind of interesting, but let me keep plowing through because I've got a lot of ground and we really do detail three of them much more. So, 3 Oscar nominations, and yeah, everyone's seen this, right? Anyone hasn't seen it? Perhaps you?
I have not seen it.
Okay. But everyone else has seen it? Okay, 2. Well, I mean, it's Hitchcock. It's classic Hitchcock. He's a psychological thriller. Hitchcock is all about getting inside your head. And it's kind of interesting how he does it, because almost as an archetype for him, he establishes everyone that is in any of his pictures doesn't quite fit in wherever they are. Whether you're uber wealthy and you're very powerful, you're still a little odd. You don't quite fit. And the same especially for his leading characters. Now in this case, the Cary Grant character is, well, he has some character, but he is not crazy. And part of what Hitchcock is always doing is he's always trying to make you feel like, am I crazy or is the rest of the entire world crazy? That's one of the things that Hitchcock is trying to do. He's trying to play with what is social reality by questioning whether we think that's right or correct or real. Okay. Now, this next one, talk about the dirty underbelly of Hollywood, Sunset Boulevard. How many of you have seen this? I'm sorry I do this, but it's kind of interesting. 1, 2. This is a fascinating film in many respects. Everyone that works in the industry has seen this. And why? Because, again, it's the cliches that are internal to the industry continue today that were there in 1953 Oscars, 11 Oscar nominations. Oh my goodness, that's really getting up there. And this is, of course, Gloria Swanson had the famous line, I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille. I mean, that's where this line came from. And that is hopefully a picture that kind of emulates that. It's a failed movie star who, and some people say that it might have been a bit of a takeoff on Stromberg from Germany, a very famous director and leading lady at the time. But, okay. And what this really examines is the human foibles that everyone has. Her character, Gloria Swanson, who would, by the way, if you've never heard of her, she used to really be, 20 years before, she really was a big-time female star. And so the casting was very interesting. But there's a writer in here, and the writer starts out as kind of a jaded character, but anyway, he gets sort of seduced by Hollywood and power, and he ends up losing and establishing more human foibles. Okay, now here's a film that I think most of you have heard, everyone's heard of, maybe only half or more have seen it. But how many, I'm going to tell you before I show, okay. All right. Now, how many Oscars did Singin' in the Rain receive?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not a right and wrong, sure.
Yeah.
Just
4.
4. You,
7.
you've heard of it, right?
Yes, I've heard of it.
Right. Everyone's heard about it, and this is the amazing part. This film did not start out as a hit, and it only got 2 nominations.
So he didn't win anything else.
It didn't win anything. And it's really surprising. But of course, over the years now, it has emerged. This has to do with the enduring capacity of real art, aspiring. And what is this? What is Singing in the Rain? Well, I kind of characterized it as an unblushing, optimistic expression of the human spirit. Maybe is one way to think about it. We don't go to it to find out something dark like the Black Swan, right? It's upbeat, and so we have bright images. The preceding movie, film, had very dark images with Gloria Swanson, as you may have seen. Anyway, so you might find that interesting. So our countdown is continuing here. Streetcar Named Desire, 1951. Well, Marlon Brando's big breakthrough, and Blanche is played by Vivian Leigh, who was the lead in Gone with the Wind. Sorry, I couldn't use that film because it was 1939, so I couldn't, no matter how much I think of it, I can't fit it in. So let's see, do you suppose it did well at the Oscars? Here's a no. Here's a maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you would be correct. 12 Oscar nominations. Best Art, Actor, Actress, and Supporting Actor. This was quite an accomplishment. And it's very interesting over time, because many people say that the Academy, meaning the Oscar, the Academy of Motion Pictures, is biased in how they select. And certainly there are little waves that go like this, what's trendy now. When John Wayne was clear he was going to pass on, he was awarded an acting award. So, but really they're pretty consistent. But they have little bitty waves that do affect. But in the long run, this phenomenal piece. And she was the only one that was not on the Broadway show originally, by the way. Okay. Well, what is this? If we were looking at this, it's kind of the illusion of social roles, because here's someone that's demented, the Blanche Dubois character, she's demented with what reality is. And he has his own dementia, but it's in a different way, not dementia in a clinical sense. And so it's about this social illusion and how they meet or don't meet. And what I'm referring to is the pathology of psychology. Because you notice they have a lot of dark images and grittiness that is displayed here. Ooh, some like it hot. This has got a lot of meat on the bones, if you'll pardon the expression. But this is one of the all-time comedies in any era, and it's a phenomenal piece. Billy Wilder directed it. Now, this was not a single shot. I just took 2 images and merged those 2. But for those of you that are not familiar with this, 1959, they looked at social issues and psychological issues because what did they do? They took 2 very popular male stars and put them in drag. And how do you do that? You have to make it a believable scenario. Well, they were musicians, and they happened to witness a mob hit Chicago, and then the mob finds out that they did, so they chase them. And the only way they can get out of the hotel is to leave disguised. And it just so happened that there was an all-female band that was leaving to get on the train. And so they disguised themselves, and since they were musicians, disguised themselves, and the band, the all-female band, had just had 2 people drop out, so they were hired immediately. And guess who the singer was? Marilyn Monroe. And so this is quite a interesting little film. If you want to, Billy Wilder's one of the most diverse, and was one of the most diverse and creative directors, American directors ever. And he did comedy, he did drama, and this is a fabulous comedy. And of course, all of you know that old adage about dying. Dying is easy, comedy is hard. And so when you take the chance to do comedy, you can really get in trouble fast. But this is a magnificent film. 1 Oscar for Best Costume, and I guess they were meaning Marilyn's costumes, I'm not certain. And 6 Oscar nominations. There's so many great lines in this, and I didn't play the clip, but do you remember the closing? I'm sure you do. The closing is just, it's brilliant. And it's a social commentary, because if you do any kind of same-sex discussion in 1959, no. And so you come up with a funny skit, and you're still making social commentary. So you have to remember the very closing line when Tony Curtis, who was in drag, but he also pretended to be a millionaire, and finally, he falls in love with Marilyn, and he, but then he confesses, I'm a scoundrel, and she says, I don't care, I love you. So that couple is nice and happy. And the Jack Lemmon character has been courted by Joe E. Brown. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was an actor from way back in the 30s, and he was playing a true millionaire. And so he keeps dating the Jack Lemmon character in drag. And so, but it's all coming to an end, and so they're in their boat, and Joey Brown says, well, will you marry me? And he says, oh, Cosgrove, is that his name? Whatever his Joey Brown's name was, character's name was. He said, oh, she says, I couldn't possibly marry you, I've got too much this, and this goes on, and he goes, oh, that's okay. Well, I'm taller than you. Oh, that's okay. Oh, I don't like being around other people. Oh, that's okay. And finally, he takes his wig and he pulls it off, and he says, Cosgrove, I'm a man. And Joey Brown says, well, no one's perfect. It's really a brilliant conclusion to the film, which is a real riot if you haven't seen it.
Kind of anticipates the end of Tootsie, the Dustin Hoffman film, where he says that he's learned how to be a better man by being alone.
Yes, it's a very interesting film. The Bridge Over River Kwai. This was a fabulous film too. It seems, if you watch it and if you put yourself in that era, it would seem pretty seamless. And you're going to see why right now. 7 Oscars, 8 nominations: Best Actor, Cinematography, Director, Editing, Music, Picture, Best Writing. It's a phenomenal film. really is about human relationships. It examines social clashes between the two societies of the Japanese and American POWs. And the Japanese have said, well, if you're going to be our POWs, you're going to work. You're going to build this bridge. And it's a war. It's an individual war. It's a social clash between cultures. And it's a war between the leaders. And also how cohesive each of the sides is. Because it can be very frustrating. And it's a very interesting piece. If you haven't seen it, take a shot. I know. Phenomenal film. 4 Oscars, actor, editing, 2 music pieces, 7 nominations. Well, Mike was shaking his head. I'm wondering, did that do anything for you?
I just haven't seen it.
Oh, you haven't
No,
seen it?
I haven't seen it.
Okay. Well, this is a very precise film. And this is one of the films that I'm going to highlight. I'm going to talk more in depth about the 2 elements. I'm going to talk about film technique and creative choices, and also sort of psychological, social end of it. So this had a very successful box. And this is the concluding. Look at the dynamic of this screen. It's got wounds. He is Gary Cooper, who won Best Actor. Okay, creative choices and techniques. Well, this is a film that was, I believe, 85 minutes long. And guess how long the screen time is supposed to be? 85 minutes. So it's attempting to set into real time. If you watch the Zero Dark 30, the actual storming of Osama bin Laden's compound was done in real time. I think it was 22 minutes, and that's why it feels so different. After a while, you settle in, because most current films, if you saw an action sequence like the one done in Zero Dark 30, it would have happened no more than 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes. It'll all be over, it'd be a lot of, but this is 22 minutes. And when you change the pace, it puts a different reality and gives a different reality to the audience. And so in this case, they're trying to make it seem real, but they're also trying to build tension. One of the ways that you can build tension is to repeatedly go back to the time. That's one of the things they did. What's the name? High Noon. Everything is set up to propel suspense. And most of you have seen this. Maybe not, but everyone else seen this? Oh, no. Okay. Remember, Tim, these are all must-sees. Absolutely must-sees, really. And so, when I have a clip that I'm going to show in just a minute, but I want to talk about a few other things. But this is the town hall clock. Okay, now another technique that they used here, when we're talking about, if are you familiar with the story, it's this very successful sheriff who took this town from a non-law-abiding town. He was hired by the administration or the mayor, the powers to be, and he did. And after X number of years, he was getting married, and he did get married, and he got married to Grace Kelly. And this was one of her very first roles. And, you know, of course, there was probably a 30 or 35-year gap in their ages, but it seemed to work okay. And so what happens is that one of the people that he arrested and sent to jail for 4 or 5 years, his trio of helpers is already out, but now he's coming in. Frank is coming in, and he's a bad dude. And so and he's arriving on the 12 o'clock train. And so even though Will, the Gary Cooper character, has retired because he got married that day and they're leaving town, there's just part of him, his individual psychology, his understanding of right and wrong, what he had just done over the last 4 or 5 years, he said, I can't leave, because then Frank would tear up the town, et cetera, et cetera. So he goes and starts trying to recruit people. And that's when he finds out there's only very, very few people. Normally you'd have 10, 15, 20 people there to help him arrest someone. But now no one, not the retired sheriff who's too old now to help him, who was his mentor, who was Will's mentor. And his own deputy sheriff is trying to get him to lead council. He can become the sheriff, but he's not really qualified. And so part of this has to do with the individuality of one person who stands up and says, I have this right and wrong vision. And the town, you know what the town said? The town said, including all the church people who have been the beneficiary, who were good friends to him, said, well, you know, if you'll just leave now, everything will be fine. Of course, they didn't approach the idea that he might chase him and kill him, but that's called literary license. You have to do that occasionally. So what it turned out to be is one person against the entirety of the town. And that is a creative choice, because you don't have anyone else, it's vacant, and yet these are all opposed to him because they didn't help, they didn't bond with him. And you have so many creative choices. They tried to make him look like he was unimportant, like he was an ant in this particular down shot. And so that was very interesting. And there are lots of ways to do that. Now, what about the social, psychological, or moral applications here? I've already mentioned a few of them. Why don't we look at this clip that I have? It's a short clip, and it'll just give you a little feel of urgency. You have music, you have everyone else has deserted him. Even his wife, who's Mormon, who they just got married, she didn't do it in a nasty way, but she said, I've lost my brother and 2 brothers and a father to Civil War, and I'm not losing. I'm opposed to any kind of gunplay. And so she is even leaving. She's getting on the train. And so here's what he's doing. Okay, see how that time is running out. And if you notice, the music was actually really on beat. They created that music that was on beat with that arm going back and forth. Now, what are some other techniques that they use to impress urgency here? Did you notice any camera technique? that they used here. One of the things they did in this little short clip is they start moving from here to here to here. Anytime they get closer, that reduces the emotional distance between the viewer and that person. It's saying, this is who I really am. And what about the shot change on the initial railroad, right? It was higher, and it looked like the railroad went on forever, right? Oh, it's got plenty of time. And when they cut to a little later, it was a down angle, and the track was right here, and it seemed much more imminent. All those are techniques to enhance the suspense and develop that. Okay. And in the end, if you see the very end of this film, Gary Cooper, the character, he has represented law and order all the way up to here at the expense of his marriage, and really it was a miracle that he survived this, but he did. He killed all 4 of the bad guys, and his wife almost died. And she's the only one that did get into the fight, and at the end she said, I can't allow that person to shoot him, so she shot him in the back, and then he has a fair fight with the big bad guy. But what's this to signify? Well, it could signify that because as they're getting on, just before they get on the state of their little wagon to drive off, he takes the badge he's worn, and he goes just like this. Because all the townspeople now are all buddies with him. They all want to come over and say, oh, good going, yeah, Will, and he just takes it, no expression, no energy, just throws it, cuts to a shot in the sand, the dirt with the star, and then he and his wife drive off. And it's kind of interesting. And when's this? 1952. This is HUAC, the House on Un-American Activities Committee. And this is when they were, especially in Hollywood, they were trying to get people to act and to tell, even when they knew there wasn't anything to tell. And so this was an interesting commentary. Is it reality created, or is it a reflection of? And so in this case, he's rejecting that social norm of what everyone says for expediency's sake. Oh, just get out of town, you'll be all right. Your life will be good. But he couldn't live with it. And so it's an interesting parallel to draw between the real world circumstances of right and wrong. And by the way, of course, this was shot in black and white. Any reason for that? Of course. They could have shot color. These are big stars. They chose black and white because black and white more clearly demonstrates right and wrong, justice, injustice.
I don't think it's ever shown in black and white, though, is it? I mean, on TV, I think it's always in color. I think that aspect's been lost because people.
I've never seen this one in color, never.
Oh, really?
Not this particular one, no.
Is that one of those
You're
when
right.
it turned colorized
Yeah,
or something?
yeah.
There are, of course, that's a huge battle in the film industry for the last 20, 25 years, that you have distributors that want to buy it for television for whatever reason, and they take these films that were originally shot in black and white or some other format, physical format, and then they change it to be appropriate. And actually they can do a very sophisticated job, but the black and white films, many of them were chosen to be in black and white. This one very clear. I've never seen it. Have you seen this in color?
On TV.
This one?
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, with the colorized.
So, and that's a process you go, and it's, anyway, okay. Yeah, it's a big battle. Okay, so let's see what comes up next now. This is number 3 on the list. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but because I have 2 left, but this was a really, really huge film on the waterfront. 8 Oscars, actor, actress, art, cinematographer, best director, film editing, best picture, best writing. Oh my goodness. One of the mega winners of all time, 12 Oscar nominations. And of course, Marlon Brando is the quintessential on the waterfront persona. And it's really I'm not gonna talk too much about the character arc because I really want to talk about the character arc and then her. But this is really about the character arc, meaning where a character starts and the battles and everything that they encounter and where they end up. It's a fascinating film. It's got a lot of different levels, and this is one of the great films. I mean, it's got one of the other elements that I did mention, and by implication, yes, but in order to be a great film, you need to have levels or layers, however you wish to express it, because if you just have a one-dimensional or even two-dimensional film, some two-dimensional films can be decent, but the great films have multiple layers. They speak to many different audiences with a lot of different voices, and this is one of those. Because if you look at the issues, they were the same issues in reality that were going on. Okay. And now we go to Ben-Hur, one of the greatest films ever made, and also, I know you know how many Oscars it won.
11.
Yeah, it's in the 11th. It's tied for the most with Titanic.
Well, actually, it was the most in Titanic, tied with that, along with Peter Jackson's.
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings, thank you. So, yeah, this was the original. Look at this list. Actor, supporting actor, art, cinematography, costume, best director, special effects, editing, music, picture, sound. Oh my goodness. Truly phenomenal. And this is the most famous chariot race of all time. If you were to put something on like this, it would be so expensive you couldn't make the movie. If the U.S. government said, yes, we're going to make one of these, I suppose you could. But there are not many horsemen around that can do it. At that time when this was constructed, it was nearing the end of the Western era in film, and there were still plenty of very talented horse people out there, but it's not something you just put together. This is not smoke, well, it's smoke and mirrors, but no CGI, and the special effects were not done in this part of the film. At least not that. Creative choices. I wonder what kind of creative choices. Now, speaking of character arc, this is one of the promotional pictures for Charlton Heston. And it just, the name, Ben-Hur, this film is about him, even though it explores all of this great, it has so many layers. Sociological, right? Psychological, the changes he went through. Then you have political, spiritual. I mean, there's so many levels to this. But it's all focused around his journey. And let's explore some of the journey here. Well, one of the ways that you can convey ideas about what someone's substance is through their relationships. And so if you notice, one of the items here is they really focus on relationships of Ben-Hur to other people and even to the horses and to a lot of different elements. And so this is a Middle Eastern character who ends up supporting Ben-Hur, and they go and form a team, and it's a very important team that they become. And so that tells you something about him because he has that relationship, right? I mean, a Jew and a Muslim, wow. They weren't just friendly, they were in league together. It took them a while, they met each other, and then they had mutual interest. And he was a very smart fellow. He was a very smart young fellow. Okay. Now here's another principal relationship. Marsalis and Ben-Hur's character were best friends growing up through about age 13 or 14. And then Marsalis was sent back to Rome to get the education of a good Roman. And Jew Ben-Hur stayed in Jerusalem and became a wealthy, highly successful merchant and citizen. And then Marcellus comes back at this age, I don't know, 30, whatever age he's to be here. And he's second in charge of the Roman garrison, only to the governor. And he immediately is not the same person he was. In fact, he tries to blackmail Judah into giving him secret sources of who he should arrest in the Jewish community in order to further the power of the Romans. So again, this is about, but because he says no, because he's a good person all along the way, he won't disenfranchise, he won't separate, he won't violate, betray his own people, nor anyone else. Marcellus throws him into the slave ship. Most people die after 1 year, and his mother and sister into the catacombs, and they develop leprosy after 5 years, but he thinks they're dead. So, let's see, what else do we have here? He goes to the slave ships, and lo and behold, in this introspective, he's turned from this really, for lack of a better phrase, this complete person. I'll say he was a super nice guy, meaning he has all the parts of life in balance. He turns from that because of his experiences, especially with his mother and sister, and he does what? He develops into a very vengeful person. So he has a psychological change. He goes from good to vengeful. Absolutely, that's what kept him alive in the slave ships for 4 years, because he hated the Marcellus and the inequity so much. And then, through miracle, if you will, he ends up saving the head of the entire shipping armada, who was the big Roman, who was the leading general, and he ends up adopting him as his son, takes him back, well, he takes him to Rome, adopts him, and then he starts racing in the great chariot races in Rome, and he becomes a great charioteer. He's already a great athlete, and then he goes back home. And that's where everything hits the fan. That's where the chariot race occurs. And so now there are some other techniques that were used here. If you'll notice, Ben-Hur, the good guy, has white horses. Marcellus, the bad guy, has black horses. He has a whip. And he also has an illegal instrument on the end of each wheel, because he can drive up and destroy another person's chariot. And okay, this is after he's won. This would be screen misdirection, except this is after he's won and he's coming back. This is actually correct here. He's already won, I believe, or they've reversed the picture one. And now he's accepting the kudos for having won this race, but the downside is the following clip. Oh, I'm sorry, I decided to show a different clip. Anyway, he ends up killing Marcellus. He didn't intentionally kill him, but Marcellus dies, because Marcellus says, I'm going to whip you, I'm going to whip you, I'm going to whip you, and finally he grabs the whip and he pulls it away, and in the meantime, Marcellus, his own chariot gets destroyed, and he's hanging on, and he gets trampled, but he still hasn't had a epiphany. And throughout this film, it's about 3 hours and 32 minutes. It's a long film, but it's a fabulous film. If you haven't seen any other films, go see it, please. But they keep putting him in environments where he could learn, even though now he's vengeful. He's been vengeful for quite a while. And this next clip is one of the precursors. Well, it wasn't a precursor. It was the first overt expression of how he might be, what he could seek, but he wasn't willing or able to seek it yet. They are marching all the prisoners. They are marching all the prisoners across the desert and not giving them any water. This is before he goes to the slave ship. So he,
Help me. I said no word for him! All on your feet, all of you! Get them on their feet! Back in line, you dog! On your feet! Get them going!
they never showed the face of Jesus in this, and one of the techniques that's used in film and video frequently to show change is to show the reaction of someone else, not just to show you. That's why when they show monsters, frequently they don't show the monster, they'll show the reaction to the monster. In this case, it's the reaction to Jesus by the centurion. It's very interesting how they played that, and then, so, okay.
Tony, was there some hesitancy at the time in films generally to show the face of Jesus?
No, I think it's a choice. And I think the choice here would have been, if I show the face of Jesus, I've got to have someone that's perfect for the role. Because whenever you cast Jesus in the robe or any of the films that Jesus is ever cast in, you have to have really the right person. And because we all have our impression of what that person may look like. So, since it was not a big role, no, that would have been a very smart, creative choice. It wouldn't have been for that reason, at least in my estimation. Because they would have had to open it up. And this way, they can put it as a sort of okay, well, he's doing a lot of things. Jesus is doing a lot of things, and so we already know who it is. And it's about symbols, and so no, I don't think that was the problem.
Is that the only scene that Jesus appears? Is that the only scene that in that movie that Jesus appears?
No,
Okay.
no, it's not.
I don't
Because
remember the movie.
at the end of the film, Jesus is been crucified.
Oh, I see.
So, so
He gets the opportunity to return the favor on the Via Dolorosa, just carrying the cross, or attempt to return the favor.
and so to go from a complete person.
By the way, Max von Sydow was a lousy Jesus, but the other guy, Jeffrey Hunter, was even worse.
Oh, yeah.
So
Plus,
part of you cast somebody is a huge disappointment.
no. It's just, talk about wrong casting, but, yeah, okay. But, so the character arc here was to go from a complete person to a vengeful, tremendously vengeful person. And in the end, he is restored and to spirituality and forgiveness. So, okay. And And I'll try to speed it up if somebody has to leave, they have to go. Okay.
I'd like to ask you a question of of all these different actors who have played Jesus. What would be, if you were the director, what kind of a look would you give Jesus? If it's not Jeffrey Hunter, which is the pretty boy, and it's not Von Sydow, who is more the existential, feel my pain. What's the middle? Is there a middle ground, or would you not even do it?
I would look for something more realistic. I mean, you look for someone who has Semitic features, not blue eyes for one
Yeah.
thing, you know.
Well, again, those, but those are, you use blue eyes, I mean, Cap Hunter, no, he's wrong, because he's a sex
It's
symbol.
Jeffrey Hunter.
I'm sorry, Jed, I'm sorry. Because he, thank you. Because he's a physical specimen and he's a sex symbol, no, it just doesn't fit the cast. But there were devices then, and just like there are devices now, the blue eyes, see, we're 50 years past this. And so the blue eyes were not seen as incorrect or inaccurate at that time. So, even though not in this one, but
I didn't think Jim Caviezel was too bad
I
in
was
The
gonna
Passion
mention
of the
that.
Christ.
I was gonna mention that.
I didn't think Jim Caviezel was too bad.
And by the way, I don't dislike Von Sydow on Max. I don't dislike him, but he's a big person. And so I think it takes a while to get it to see him in that, and so you have to watch it. I don't mean you, but I mean viewers. And my favorite version is Zeffirelli's version of Jesus. That is nice. In my estimation, it's the best. Of course, it's a mini-series, so it's different. It's not a film. It's not television. Okay. Did anyone else? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But it's very difficult to cast Jesus, not just because who has the. What about Jesus Christ Superstar with Ted? What's Ted's last name? Hey, he had the look. Whoa, those are some powerful vocals too.
I think you'd almost have to have maybe an unknown or something, because it's like, doesn't John Wayne play a centurion in one of these?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, that's John Wayne in a centurion suit.
Yeah.
That's not a centurion. And I'm looking, that's Max von Sydow in Jesus paraphernalia. I didn't have that impression of Jim Caviezel, but it might even be preferable to have a an unknown, so you don't think it's that actor playing the role.
I'm trying to remember the name, but I don't remember the name. Maybe you can help me. The nemesis of Spider-Man on the first recent movie. Defoe. Didn't he play Jesus also? Yeah.
That's right.
Well, you want a Jesus that looks more gritty than a Max von Sydow in Jeffrey Hunter, I think.
That's right. Defoe.
Yeah.
Yeah, he definitely has the look.
I think Jim Caviezel, you mentioned, is the best Jesus, to my opinion.
Even if they don't show the face like this scene is nice. I say if they don't even show the face like this, hard to show.
He keeps it mysterious,
Yeah.
you know.
This is when this process shot of Charlton Heston. See, this is a different look. This is after he's gone from complete to vengeful to spiritual. This look. Okay, I'm going to turn this down a little bit. Move to number one is 12 Angry Men. Only received 3 Oscars, but look at them. Whoa, director pick and writing. And, well, it's a little too spiritual for them. Okay, now, again, let's, if you see that as a switchblade knife, and most of you have seen this, right? There's another version that came out, I think, in '93 with Jack Lemmon, which was actually a very, very good version. Of course, this is even better, but that's a great version that they came out with later, but this is phenomenal. And
When I saw 12 Angry Men, I thought you were talking about the one with the Lee Marvin in there.
that's the 12 Dirty Dozen.
Oh, okay. Never mind. The Dirty Dozen. You're right.
They're dirty.
Yeah,
Not
you're
angry.
right.
They're angry. And this, some of the creative choices here, again, if you study this, it again has to do with society saying this is correct, and then a single individual deciding, you know what, I want to explore this. I have the fortitude to explore this, even though his character is very nice. He wasn't mean about it. He just said, well, I think we should talk about this, and that's what this image does, is it depicts that one person is opposed to everyone else in here, at least initially. And have all of you seen this? You've seen this? Yeah, okay. What do you think?
It's a tremendous film. We
Absolutely.
actually watched parts of it in school as well. That's what got me to watch the full film, because I enjoyed it so much.
Remember the first thing that I said today that makes a great film? You must have it to have a great film, and it's in all these films, and that's a script. The script or the writing has to be phenomenal, and that's what makes this work. Can you imagine taking a great script and then shooting it in a room that's smaller than this room? They have two small scenes that are outside, but essentially you shoot the entire picture in a room. Well, no wonder they're angry. It's hot, it's in the summer, it's very humid. I'd be angry too, because I got ball tickets to go to. I got places to go, people. Okay, so, but it's a fascinating character study of 12 people and how they come to seeing a different reality. And again, think of this as right in the middle of the 1950s, which is supposed to be very placid. And by placid, we mean we're not biased, right? We're thoughtful, we're rational. Well, okay. Actually, the main argument that the Fonda character plays is that he wants rationality versus emotion. He argues for justice versus prejudice. And he does it by using rational thinking. And, oh, this was a tour de force by B.J. Cobb here. Okay, and here he's still on. And this is further down in the process of the deliberation. And then, at some point, what happens is that the group is starting to realize one by one that the obvious isn't always the correct conclusion. You need to have proof, you need to think rationally, logically, and not just emotionally. And bigoted or prejudice, whether it's age, race, and that's what this is. And think about it, in the 1950s, even though we know that we're more advanced now in the racial sense, but they, in many respects, thought that they were advanced, and they were, because they made huge changes in World War II with African-American soldiers being put in the war and being very successful. And so, but the issues of race were still huge. In fact, they were huge. That's when everything came to a head. So this was, again, is it reflection of reality or is it creation of reality? And this is when they're rejecting the Ed Begley Sr.'s character of being prejudiced. And even everyone's just turned around and said, no, that's too extreme. That's what they're saying. This is a huge directing challenge. Can you imagine directing? And by the way, every one of these people in here, in case you didn't know, had a phenomenal acting career. Even the least of the character actors right here. And that's, B.J. Cobb, Marshall, anyway, it's a tremendous cast. Why did they shoot it in black and white? 1957, we got color, we got the bucks. Because, again, back to the black and white, justice versus injustice. And this is the look at the end, I think. This is the look that I would ascribe to him, maybe early in the film. But He represents the everyman, the best of every man, not just a great person or an everyman, but the best in every man is what he is trying to represent here. I have a short clip I'd like to show you of this. And look at the techniques, because one of the camera techniques, one of the big challenges here is, how do I make this an important movie? How do I make it a good movie without, in a little box? I only got 12 people, I got great dialogue, but how do I do it? What he did was he chose to keep his cameras essentially stationary, essentially, there's some exceptions of course. But then he had movement within frame. So he didn't move the camera, he moved inside the frame. And you're going to see that in this scene. It's really phenomenal. They're deliberating it and they're talking about the switchblade knife. Whoops.
Stayed home, had another fight with his father, stabbed him to death, and left the house at 10 minutes after 12. He even remembered to wipe the knife between the fingerprints. Now, are you trying to tell me that this knife really fell through a hole in the boy's pocket? Someone picked it up off the street, went to the boy's house, and stabbed his father with it just to test its sharpness?
No, I'm just saying it's possible the boy lost his knife and that somebody else stabbed his father with a
that
similar knife.
dynamic?
It's just possible.
Take a look at this knife. It's
Watch
a
this
very
reverse
unusual
shot.
knife. I've never seen one like it. Neither had the storekeeper who sold it to the boy. Aren't you asking us to accept a pretty incredible coincidence?
I'm just saying a coincidence is
Close
possible.
up.
And I say it's not possible.
Walk in. Watch this shot. Stationary.
Where did that come from? Here I do.
Where did you get it?
I went out walking for a couple of hours last night. I walked through the boys' neighborhood.
That little scene is so much because it's put you off. You're off because we're used to seeing close-ups or mid shots or two shots. And here he stands completely out of frame. Here's the frame. And he stands completely out of frame. And all you see are his pants. And you see the action. And he throws the knife down perfectly as the punchline to the frame. That's a great little scene. And there are a lot of very subtle elements here. In case, just a little concluding note on this, is if you ever watch it closely, you'll see the E.J. Cobb character walk with his back to the camera for very briefly, and he walks across it, and the shot is a side shot of Henry Fonda looking across at Marshall with about 4 or 5 people there, and Cobb walks all the way around the room. You can't see him. He comes in and he walks across with his back to the camera, across like this. And as someone is making a salient point to try to persuade the Fonda character that yes, he is guilty, he leans in like this and says, "You're damn right he's guilty." And he's talking to the back of his head. And the subtle part of that is really, it represents the conscience. It's supposed to represent the conscience. And all this is very subtle. There are a lot of different subtleties. This is a fabulous film. And
Yeah, the music from that movie?
yes, these are all different pieces. And well, thank you for asking me to present. It's my pleasure. But what kind? I'd like to hear some of the comments that you might have. Oh, this is the part. It's got the choir. Now that there's been an epiphany. I'm sorry. So what?
I had a question.
Sure.
When was El Cid made?
I think that was 59, but I'm probably off a couple of years.
And why is not a part of your list? It's not a good movie? Okay.
No, it's an epic. It's a very good epic. But no, Charlton Heston is, even though he won here, he's not known as. He was actually known as the Great Stoneface, and so. But he was at the right place at the right time, and he really did a phenomenal job on this Ben-Hur character.
Back up one slide for me, or two. Not that it's that important, but from a
from a social, psychological, and moral perspective, we still use this film in sociology, psychology, and really, if you think about, I'm not sure the impetus for this particular film, but if you look at the Milgram experiment, the Ash experiment, and the Zimbardo experiment, it's three most infamous studies in all of psychology, and specifically social psychology. They really kind of revolve around the power of one, and obedience, and the power of the situation, and the power of a person to change the situation, and vice versa. And so this film, and its remake, which is also excellent, really speak to all of those issues. And so for me, when I watch a film, I'm not an expert, I'm not an aficionado necessarily, but I look to see, what was the political structure at the time, what is the moral implication of the time, even who the actor is and what he went on to do and his daughter went on to do and things like that. And you said regarding, the Red Scare in Hollywood and just all those factors, because you asked me the other day, you gave me a hint as to what you picked, and I got, because this one to me is the most poignant, I think, at least for me and my field and my expertise and my passion of all the films that you mentioned. And it's the only one that stuck out, among the others, that really stuck out as the 1950s, here come the 60s kind of movie.
I think it's interesting within the subtlety of it, that the rest of the guys don't see themselves as, most of them, I don't think, none of them probably would say they were racist, and saw themselves as that they were rationally thinking about it. They didn't see the underlying prejudices that they had. Of course, they were blind to it, and it takes fun to bring it out.
I couldn't agree with that. That's right.
Well, part of the social commentary too is 12 Angry Men.
Yeah.
There are no women, and I guess if you're going to talk about anybody having a more feminine perspective, the whole dynamic is the Henry Fonda character, more in terms of relationships and empathy and caring than let's get rid of this rule breaker. Billy Wilder, I recognize, was directed at least 2 of your films. Were there any others in your list that Billy Wilder was directed? Sunset Boulevard, and then I forget the other one you mentioned.
Something Like It Hot.
Was he Some Like It Hot?
Yeah.
Okay, those 2.
Yeah. He's one of the great directors. William Wyler is the one that directed Ben-Hur, and they were contemporaries, and they were phenomenal. John Ford, Sturges.
Could you say that the 2 representative films by Elia Kazan on the waterfront, and then Streetcar are seminal, especially in that they influence acting more than just about anything in the 60s and 70s and beyond. That is the Brando type acting.
Not the Meisner technique. It's
Going inside, Stanislavski technique. And as far as influence, when I think of seminal anything, I think of how it influences things later. And surely that acting technique had a tremendous influence.
Marlon Brando, even though the last 25 years of his career wasn't really seen as an actor, but he was a tour de force in the truest sense. He was the actor in the 1950s. And there were plenty of great actors. He was the one that came on very young, used the technique, and also James Dean. Only did 3 films.
Right.
Everyone still knows his name. They still talk. He only did 3 films.
In 55.
It's striking too. This is your personal list, but these are all tremendous films. There's really a masculine orientation in every one of them, isn't there? Which also goes to what the 50s were about. But every one of them is in some way a demonstration of some aspect of masculinity. Not that it isn't also critiqued and undermined in some other aspect of the film. For example, in High Noon, Grace Kelly shoots one of the people who wants to kill Gary Cooper. She saves Gary Cooper. It's the woman saving the man. So it's not that gender isn't critiqued, but there's overwhelming masculinist orientation to all these things.
Well, the Ben-Hur, really, if you've seen it.
Well, many years ago.
Yeah. You should go see it again, because
When it came out of the theaters.
because I was focused this morning. It's easier to demonstrate action, and men are more typically in action, certainly in that era. Now it's not so the last 10 or 15 years, but I wouldn't characterize Ben-Hur as a masculine film. It certainly, because it really has the flip-flop. It's a balance. It's like Gone with the Wind in the sense that absolutely you've got big masculine characters, but you also have other balancing element of feminine energy and focus. And I would have to say, let's see, with this one, okay, but
I'm not saying it's a problem, I'm
Yeah.
just, it's
well,
just
it's
definitely
interesting. I
there.
hadn't thought about it
Yeah.
quite from that same perspective, but you
Yeah.
got to remember that film does reflect society, and in the 50s,
Yeah. Right.
you know, women weren't working, not really. I mean, a number of women were, but most women weren't working. They weren't fully enfranchised. I mean, life is really changing. So you show the action, typically films show the action orientation of our society. What do people want to go see? And so now we have women that are beating people up.
I'm not a film buff, but would Rebel Without a Cause be number 13?
No,
Would anywhere in there at all?
no.
Again, I think of social issues or iconic
It
persona.
absolutely, and people know of it. They know of James Dean, that would, but probably it's a noteworthy film, but it wouldn't be number 13, and probably surprised. That's why everyone has their own list. But technically, it's pretty rough, really, if you just go and look at it.